I'm Kent Lamb, and I'm a data hoarder. I've been collecting the raw footage from all my films since 2010 when I made my first feature. I'm talking about every sound effect, every graphic, every music file, everything. Because you know what? You never know when you're gonna start a YouTube channel and need to reference all your old projects. It happens, and it's handy to have those files sitting around. But the thing is, if I want one of these files, it's probably on a couple of drives, but more than likely it's on like 4 of the drives. And then you gotta play a little game of I Spy to spot the difference and figure out which one of these drives has the most updated version of the project. And then sometimes you'll keep searching around and then you'll find out, you know what? It's not on any of the drives, it's just gone. So it's not so much of a system here. The way I would describe it is really
chaos reigns.
Oh, also I've got all these old hard drives from editing clients. They're like 7 years old. I don't know why I still have them, but they honestly give me anxiety. And by the way, this video has been almost 2 years in the making. That's how long this problem has been out of hand and bugging me. And the only thing that stopped me from fixing it earlier is fear. Fear of the time, money, and frustration that devising an organized and automated data storage and backup system that would stand the test of time would cost me. Well, finally, I've had enough. And it's time to fix this mess. So feel free to watch this and copy my new system for keeping my data organized and safe. And if you don't want to spend the time or money doing what you're about to see, which is a little bit crazy, I'll also show you an easier alternative system that I recommend for any of you that are further back in the path of data hoarding than me. Now, my goals are as follows. 1, consolidate all of the relevant data in these drives into one giant working drive. 2, get rid of all these shuttle drives, minus a couple to use as actual shuttle drives when you need to actually shuttle data from one place to another. 3, organize all this data logically and cleanly on this new giant drive and delete any duplicate files wasting storage space. 4, set up this archive so that every file is always accessible 24/7 on any device, anywhere. 5, create an automated backup system so that it's practically impossible to lose my data even if my house burned to the ground and I don't ever have to worry about it or think about it. 6, create a logical workflow for new projects or data to be added to this archive so that everything from now on will stay orderly and safe. And finally, 7, not lose my mind in the technical weeds and details of creating this system.
Okay, let's go.
So I got a NAS. NAS stands for Network Attached Storage. It's basically a giant box of hard drives that act as one big drive, and people can plug into it over a network, whether that's a local network like your Ethernet cable or Wi-Fi at your house here, or over the internet. But it's more than a big hard drive. It's actually its own computer that runs 24/7, so it's always available to give other computers the files that it's storing. And you can actually run a whole production company with a powerful NAS and have multiple editors working off of the same unit at the same time, which was common when I would go into agencies or production companies to edit as a freelancer. We might have 5 editors working across the same projects from one NAS, and we're all getting fast enough speeds off that device through the network. And full disclosure, this NAS was given to me by QNAP, but they don't get to see this video until I post it, so I can and will say whatever I want. Don't believe me? Scrotum. There. Speaking of which, let's get into the nuts and bolts of this device and how I've set up my whole data workflow with this NAS as the backbone of it, because I know a lot of other editors and filmmakers could benefit from a similar setup. Now, this is a 6-bay NAS, meaning 6 hard drives, or SSDs if I wanted, can fit in here. I've set it up in a RAID 6 configuration, which just means that the hard drives all work together so you get faster transfer speeds, plus some safety in knowing that if 2 of these drives suddenly died, I can just replace them and the NAS will rebuild all the data I lost from the 4 drives that are still working. Now, if I get up in that NAS, you'll see that I filled it up with 8 terabyte drives, giving me a total of 48 terabytes of space. But in RAID 6, 2 drives are used as data protection, so my usable space gets knocked down to 32 terabytes. There's some other little things that'll eat that down even further, so if you want a lot of space, get bigger drives in the beginning. But before you go shoving a bunch of big hard disks up your NAS, remember that size isn't everything. You'll want to use drives that are rated for NAS use, like these Seagate Iron Wolf drives. The reason is that NAS don't quit, literally. It's going to be running 24/7, so your disk needs to keep up. All hard drives eventually fail, but Iron Wolf drives are meant to be spinning non-stop and should last longer than a typical drive in a NAS. Okay, 6 drives, RAID 6, but wait, there's more. If you intend to actually work directly off this NAS like I am, and not just use it as a big archive storage box, then you'll probably want an SSD cache in it. For editing, this just helps read and write data faster than even a RAID array of spinning hard disks can do. And it's not strictly necessary, but it's certainly helpful for keeping your timelines running smoothly. Now you could put an SSD in one of your drive slots for your cache, but for this QNAP NAS, I have 2 extra slots for SSD caches built into the unit. And even with 2 little 500 gigabyte Iron Wolf SSDs here, she purrs in every Premiere project that I've opened so far. But wait, what even is this NAS, you ask? Well, this is QNAP's new TVS-h674T. Super catchy name that really just rolls off the tongue, but this is actually the world's first Thunderbolt 4 NAS, so they say. Now typically you connect to a NAS over Ethernet cables, and if you want the fastest speeds, you'd have to upgrade to a 10 gig Ethernet on your router and get an adapter for your computer, which is expensive and it's confusing, and it's more than I want to deal with right now anyways. Thunderbolt just simplifies the process and lets me treat it a little more like a big external hard drive. But really it's not, it's a network drive, but I'll get into that later. Now this NAS also runs internet through the Thunderbolt port, so that one cable is giving me internet and NAS access at as high a speed as my router and ISP will give me. And Thunderbolt 4 will give me a measure of future proofing for a while too. It's just like the fastest, most versatile connection right now. Now besides the 2 Thunderbolt ports and the built-in SSD slots, the great thing about this specific NAS for editors, the TVS-h674T, is that it also has 32 gigs of memory built in and a fast processor. It's a 12th gen Intel Core i5 processor, and that means it's going to have no trouble delivering you smooth editing performance. And although I haven't tested this, I would assume that it would perform quite well even with multiple editors working off of the same unit. Now if you cheap out on the NAS processor, because there are much cheaper NASs available out there, you will handicap your editing performance, as this machine has to perform a lot of calculations to serve up the right data from multiple drives quickly when you're scrubbing and editing the timeline. That's my understanding anyway. So if you just want to use this NAS as an archive and not a working drive, then by all means cheap out on the processor. I needed one that could handle some hardcore work. And one more big benefit for editors, this unit also has an extra PCI Express slot available, which means you can buy a card like this for about 200 bucks and you'll easily be able to add 2 more SSDs to the system if you ever want more fast storage space, for example. Pretty handy. I'll probably add 2 8 terabyte SSDs to this once the prices come down on those over the next year or 2, or maybe I'll just buy a lower priced expansion unit like this, which connects to the NAS to add more storage, or for a specific bigger project like whenever I make my next feature, for example. So you get a lot of options about expanding your storage space when you get a NAS. So it seems like this system might allow me to complete all 7 of my goals. However, it's not cheap. Make no mistake, getting a NAS system, especially a powerful and versatile one like this, is an investment for your business. And if your data is not bringing in money, it's probably not the time to invest in a NAS, because this NAS, empty, without any of the hard drives or SSDs inside it, costs significantly more than my first car, if you can believe that. Now granted, this was not a nice car. You can usually tell when one door is painted a different color, but once you add in the hard drives, and even with relatively cheap 8 terabyte drives like I have in here, it adds up even more. So if you're considering buying a NAS, I do recommend that you first get a couple 100,000 subscribers on YouTube so that you can get it for free. But I will say that even if I wasn't given this unit, I was ready to buy a NAS, and knowing what I now know about NAS systems after 2 weeks straight of learning and fiddling with the thing, I can honestly say that this higher end unit would have been worth the investment for me and for my business. It's not only helping me now, I plan on using this unit for the next 5 to 10 years and expanding upon it, and I think the time and money that I'm spending on it right now is creating the infrastructure for me to continue growing my little business. So now that we've covered the hardware, let's look at how this whole thing actually works and how I set it up. I'm not going to get in the weeds of the details of setting this thing up. There's better videos on other channels that will do that, which I'll give you some recommendations for, and I probably will tell you something wrong. And in fact, one fear I had about getting a NAS was that the whole thing would be way too technical for me to figure out, because I am not an IT guy. I don't understand how networks or servers actually work. But honestly, once you set it up, the QNAP software walks you through the most important setup steps, and although it definitely wasn't as easy as setting up a new Mac, for example, it wasn't that crazy. So basically, you just plug the NAS into your router with an Ethernet cable, and then you plug another Ethernet cable, or in this case, a Thunderbolt cable, from the NAS to your computer. And the way you actually manage the NAS is through a web browser. It's like another computer desktop on your browser. It looks like this. Pretty straightforward, actually. A bunch of messages will pop up when you're first setting it up, and it'll help you get through all the most important steps to get everything up and running, like setting up your storage pool and your RAID configuration. If you get lost, I found that QNAP UK's YouTube channel has a bunch of helpful videos, as well as the NAS Compares channel. Now once it's all set up, you can connect to the NAS as a network drive. This QFinder app that you download kind of simplifies things. It'll just mount the NAS onto your computer for you and bring up the browser page to manage the NAS. Speaking of apps, a cool perk about a NAS like this is that I can download their free QFile Pro app on my phone or any other device. And then when I log in, I get access to all of the NAS files anywhere in the world. Or I can take a video from my phone and upload it to the NAS through the internet. And this is just a very, very handy tool for me with these YouTube videos, because sometimes we'll be out filming something and then I can just put it into that project file and it's already organized. You can even set it up to back up your entire camera roll automatically to the NAS and have essentially free unlimited phone storage. Although I personally won't do that for one reason.
System breach. Firewall 1.
We're being hacked.
When you use a NAS like this, as long as it's connected to the internet, you are actually exposing your data to potential hacking and ransomware and Mr. Robot types of dudes. Now there are ways to protect yourself with IP addresses and router settings and apps on the QNAP software, but it gets really technical really quick. But fortunately, there's a much easier way to deal with the security risk of a NAS that's connected to the internet. Just don't put anything sensitive on the NAS and keep everything that's on the NAS backed up somewhere else. I'll show you how I conveniently killed both of these birds with one stone shortly. But first, I had to get everything off of these little drives and onto this NAS. Now this took a while because I had a lot of drives. The NAS transfers files really fast because of that RAID 6 configuration, but the bottleneck on speed is the slow transfer speed of each single shuttle drive. They're all pretty slow. So after a couple of days of dragging and dropping folders like this, I went through all my old drives and had about 23 terabytes of data on the NAS, which is a lot more than I thought I'd have, so I was getting a little nervous about how little free space I'd have to work with on this thing. But the next step was to actually organize this mess, and I wanted a super clean and simple folder structure for everything in the NAS, and I wanted to eliminate the duplicated files that I was sure were on there. And after another 2 days of doing all that, I eradicated the most glaring duplicate files, which freed up a lot of space, and I created this simple folder structure that allows me quick access to all my personal film projects from the last 10 years, all the YouTube videos from the last 3 years, and all the client work that I actually cared enough to keep. Again, this is not just the finished exports, this is all of the working files too. The idea is I can go open up any random Premiere project if I need to and pull any file or asset, whatever I need. But there was still too much data on here. I wanted to have a lot of free space for future projects. I mean, that was kind of the whole point originally. And after doing some soul searching, I finally let go and took the working files from my old client edits off the NAS. So I reduced it to just the final exports, and that saved me 3 terabytes. I usually only use about 1.5 terabytes every year for YouTube videos, so that got me 2 years of YouTube content. So I archived the full client projects onto this little shuttle drive and a clone of this drive too. So if I ever do need those projects, I got them right here. I also went through and deleted all of the old Adobe Premiere preview files from my old films that were just taking up hundreds of gigs unnecessarily. And in the end, I had 19 terabytes of data on the NAS, and it's beautifully organized in a folder structure that I can continue adding to indefinitely. The next step was to get this thing out of my office because all these hard drives do make some noise and I record videos in here. So I moved the NAS into the den. I set it up next to the router that's already there and connected them via Ethernet. Put this spice rack I found on Amazon around it as a protective barrier so that my cats can't jump on it and whatever they're gonna do. And I ran this 3-meter long Thunderbolt 4 cable through the hole in my wall into my office and into my Thunderbolt 4 dock, which goes into the MacBook. Once I hide everything with this cap, cabinet in the den, it all looks exactly the same, and I can barely hear the NAS from my office. Now, if I'm ever out of town or away from home and I need a file or even a whole project, I can log into my NAS on the My QNAP Cloud website and I can download it. It's very comforting knowing that everything is always available wherever I am. Not only that, I can even create a link to any file or folder that's on the NAS and send that to anyone just like it's on Google Drive or Dropbox. But there's still one massive problem that we haven't addressed, and this turned out to be the most challenging part of this whole project. 5, create an automated backup system so that it's practically impossible to lose my data even if my house burned to the ground and I don't ever have to think or worry about it. Now, there were a few solutions to this problem. You can get a second NAS and place it in someone else's house or office and then automatically sync your NAS to that second NAS. But that's an expensive proposition. You gotta buy a whole new NAS, a bunch of drives, and I'd have to convince somebody to let me store this big box in their house. Another straightforward option is to use one of the many cloud backup services that's integrated with QNAP software to store everything online. But since they charge by the terabyte, at 19 terabytes and counting, that's also going to add up fast. Now, a cheaper option is to buy a giant 22 terabyte hard drive and back up the whole NAS to that. The downside is that I'll run out of space on that drive pretty soon, and to protect my data against catastrophes like my house burning down, I'd have to physically store the hard drive in another location after backing it up, which is very far from an automated system. I considered instead running a backup to a 22 terabyte hard drive like once a week and keeping that drive in a fireproof safe, but even fireproof safes get really hot inside when there's a fire, potentially frying the drive anyways, and they're only rated to last like an hour in the event of a fire. So let's be real, this option won't actually protect my data if my house burns down or gets robbed, and it's still a lot of manual work. I couldn't crack the code for a while on this problem, but finally I found exactly what I was looking for. This video is not sponsored by this service, it's just the only option that made sense to me. Backblaze is a website that offers automated cloud backups of all of the data on your computer, and using their personal plan, this costs $100 a year for unlimited data, which is actually a very reasonable price for unlimited data, especially compared to the other cloud options I was looking at. But their terms of service clearly stipulates that this personal plan does not apply to attached servers like a NAS, and the software won't recognize network drives like a NAS, so it's no good for us. But there's a catch. Their software on their personal plan will also back up any normal external hard drives connected to your computer, and there's no limit on how big those drives are or how many drives like that there are. Do you see where I'm going with this? I run an automation to back up the NAS to the giant hard drive every night. I schedule Backblaze to back up my Mac and the giant hard drive every night. Now my NAS and all my personal files are backed up off-site automatically for $100 a year, plus the one-time cost of a 22 terabyte hard drive and a USB dock for it. Now, the biggest downside is that the initial backup takes forever. It actually is still running as I record this. Might end up taking 3 weeks on my connection to get all that data backed up to the cloud. That's okay because I still have my local backups here anyways, so I'm no worse than I was before I bought the NAS. And once the initial backup is complete, it's only going to have to upload the new files that have been added in the past day, which is much faster. And to automate the system, I used a program called Carbon Copy Cloner, which I already had on the Mac, to sync the NAS to the drive on a schedule every night when I'm not working. Backblaze runs continuously, so I don't have to do anything there. And if I don't want to have the drive running during the day, I can just turn it off and then turn it back on at night, or just leave it running, who really cares? Now, if you watched this far, it's almost time for the satisfying conclusion of getting rid of all my old hard drives. But first, if this whole system just sounds too expensive, too involved, there are cheaper, although less robust options for backing up and storing your media.
Oh, and you know we can't afford the fun pack.
For most people, especially individual editors or filmmakers working solo, you don't need the ability for collaborators or employees to connect to your media and work simultaneously on your projects. You also don't need the ability to download any projects files you've ever used over Wi-Fi, but you still need your work backed up and accessible while you're at work. So here's 2 easy and cheap options that I'd recommend. Now, the easiest, cheapest option is to simply get the biggest hard drive you can afford, like the 22 terabyte drive I bought, and get Backblaze Personal. You're done. And as an added benefit, you can still download your files remotely through Backblaze's website or mobile app, so you get some level of access to all this stuff, but you won't have the multiplied disk speeds of a RAID array working for you with this single drive option. So not the best for working off of this giant drive, but that's not a big deal because proxy workflows can alleviate this bottleneck in editing, and I use proxies for pretty much everything I work on anyways. But if you wanted to beef up this system even more and get those faster speeds, I'd recommend option number 2. Get a DAS. A DAS is a direct attached storage system. It's the same as a NAS, but without the network connectivity. In other words, you get a big box with multiple hard drives in it, you set it up as a RAID array, so it's treated like one normal, really fast hard drive by your computer, and then you'll be able to back up to the cloud directly through Backblaze while keeping those NAS-like disk speeds. DAS units are way cheaper and less technical to set up, so you'll save yourself a ton of time and money versus a NAS if you want to go that route. Again, I'm happy with the NAS just because it's future-proofing my setup and my business, but right now I probably could have been fine with just a DAS. So that's pretty much it. I still have another week or so before Backblaze finishes uploading everything to the cloud, but since I have all this data backed up locally, I can finally start clearing out some valuable real estate in my office. I also hit up my old editing client who most of those client hard drives belong to. Turns out he wanted them back. So there it is, years of annoyances, worries, fears, and confusion finally resolved. Today truly feels like the first day of the rest of my data hoarding life.